I don't think it's going to have a very big impact because ultimately it'll come to the UN who, say all sorts of things, but in effect are paralysed. And if this was ever to go to the International Criminal Court, it would take years and years.
South Africa has brought a case against Israel before the International Court of Justice, accusing Israel of genocide in Gaza. It's calling on the court to issue provisional measures calling for a ceasefire. Israel has strongly rejected the allegation and called it baseless. Now, this is a really important story on so many levels, or is it, I suppose, is the question. Anne, let's start with you. Really fascinated to have your thoughts on this. Is it likely to have any impact, quite literally tangible impact, or just in terms of the narrative of the war?
I think there are 2 points here, Anna. One is that the use of the term genocide, which I think you can have very strong and different views about where the rights and wrongs of this conflict are going and the humanitarian catastrophe that is happening in Gaza and how to sort of use any levers that you have to minimize that. I think there is genuinely a problem with using the term genocide because as very, very serious as this is, and many people are losing their lives who should not lose their lives, who are not combatants, it is blurring the lines of a very, very, very high bar to using that term and to use it about Israel after the Holocaust is obviously in all of our memories, I think is particularly a bad thing to do. I think in the case of South Africa, look, in the international system, as I've followed it for a number of decades, it has tended to, because of the ANC reliance on Moscow and to an extent an alignment now with China and with powers who are not going to just tick the box for the American view of the world or say that Israel has to, can be restrained, but that Israel is basically right to root out Hamas. They are kind of a cat's paw for those interests. And I think that's something that perhaps if you read that story in the top line, you might not immediately get. There are reasons why South Africa takes that position, which are to do with its leverage in the international system. I think it is absolutely fair to keep pressure on that way, on the Israeli position. And I have to say, followed the Israel parliamentary and political system quite closely. I don't think this matters to Israel at all. I think they see it as a war of survival.
Interesting. Jo, your thoughts on this, on what South Africa are calling for and what impact, if any, it is likely or could have?
Well, I don't think it's going to have a very big impact because ultimately it'll come to the UN who, say all sorts of things, but in effect are paralysed. And if this was ever to go to the International Criminal Court, it would take years and years. But symbolically, I think it's quite important. I think, Anne's right. I don't think Benjamin Netanyahu and his government in Israel give a damn what anybody thinks. They've shown that by the way they have behaved and the way Palestinians have been herded from one place to another place and then been bombed. I think, there is growing concern, quite rightly, at the terrible, terrible humanitarian catastrophe that is unfolding before our eyes. And I think there is a sense around the world of utter helplessness and hopelessness that nobody can stop this, that nobody can save innocent people, women, children, people who are working with aid agencies, people who are working in the health service in Gaza. And I think, Joe Biden, who seemed to be quite sensible when he said, don't make the mistake that America made after 9/11, has actually now boxed himself into a corner by, he can criticize and he can condemn Netanyahu and the Israelis for what they're doing, but he's still selling arms to them. So, I think we're in a terrible, terrible mess. And the awful tragedy is that innocent people are paying the price. What will be Gaza after? When, if this war ever comes to an end? And of course, the longer it goes on, the more likely it is to spread. So I think South Africa's move is symbolic. I think it's quite important, but I don't think it will actually achieve anything.